Review Day. So, that's all I got. Any questions from you guys before we get started? Okay, it's been a week, and it feels like a lot longer than a week. So let's see if I can keep things straight enough for today. Okay, good, that's going. So, let's start with Chapter 7. That's that. Okay. So, with the expansion plans under Jefferson, so using the Northwest Land Ordinance in 1785, what was Jefferson trying to achieve? He was the one that drafted it initially, and he had a different idea for the Northwest than what ended up happening. So what's Jefferson's original idea for Northwest Territory? Mm-hmm. What was his plan for that? Yeah, sorry. Yes. So what Jefferson wanted was 14 small states, because with the way the Senate works, that means there will be a lot more states that were agrarian, and therefore they would have more power in the Senate, is what his whole thing was. This ended up becoming the Midwest, which is not 14 states. But that was his initial plan. Because again, remember, Jefferson's the agrarian guy, Hamilton's the industrial guy. And if it means that you can have a lot of farming states, then that's what Jefferson's attempted to go for. Okay. How about the founder of the first African American church in North America, or at least in America? Yes. Remember who that was? Yeah, Richard Allen. And I don't know where else to put this, so I'm just going to stick this down here. Oops. What was the religious sect that was first to rally to the idea of emancipation in America? Which religious group was on top of emancipation even before the Revolution? Yeah, the Quakers. So we talked about them a little bit before, and then I had the whole thing about the Quakers and emancipation. Excuse me. All right. So let's get to the Articles of Confederation. And all of that stuff. So, again, I mentioned this in class. I'm not sure, I couldn't re-find that in the notes. But who drafted the Articles of Confederation back in 1775, like originally? Had these ideas together before we even were in the war. Do you remember that one? At some point, that was a big thing for me, so I'll put it in the test. I just, for some reason, I can't remember where it was in the notes. It had to be in the early part, at least, with the Art of Confederation. Let's see if it's here in the book. I mean, it would have to be in the book. I'll give y'all this one. This was Ben Franklin. He initially drafted the Articles of Confederation way back in 1775 as some form of government for the colonies. So under the Articles of Confederation, where did most of the power go? What part of the government, or I guess the country, had most of the power under the Articles of Confederation? They were the only ones that could vote. No, this was part of the reason why we had to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, because it was making running the government difficult. So what part of the country had the most power when it came to the Articles of Confederation? Was it the federal government or the state governments that had the most power under the Articles? Yes, the state governments. There was very little federal power at all. Which again is why they had to replace it, because like the federal government couldn't raise any money or have any troops. Okay, so there were multiple plans of how to replace the Articles of Confederation. Was a plan that suggested a two-house Congress where representation of both houses would be proportional to a state's population. So the bigger the state, the more representatives they have. What was this plan called? This was the Virginia plan. Good, because Virginia was a populous state, so they would benefit from that. The opposing proposal, there was a single house legislature, and each state had a single representative. What was this plan called? New Jersey plan. All right. I think this is. Yep. After the Great Compromise, a certain degree of representation for the slave population for southern states was granted. What fraction of a person was each slave counted as for purpose of representation? 3/5. It's the 3/5 compromise. Before we get to the Constitution thing, what was the name of the rebellion that was a result of taxes under the Articles of Confederation? And like the whole reason we talk about it is because it was a pretty obvious showing that hey, maybe the Articles aren't strong enough to run a country. Yeah, Shays Rebellion. All right. Let's get into a little bit more with the Constitution. Let's see. So there was a debate over ratifying the Constitution. This group was led by Patrick Henry and Samuel Adams, and they opposed the Constitution, or the ratification of the Constitution. What was this group called? Those that opposed ratification. Anti-Federalists. Yeah, I decided to make sure, I figured I wouldn't put those two, Federalists and Anti-Federalists, in order, because that would just be too easy. But speaking of, what was the group led by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay that supported the ratification of the Constitution? The Federalists. Let's see. The Constitution was ratified. They had a new form of government created. There's still two major political parties that split due to various differences. What was a party led by Alexander Hamilton that wanted a stronger central government? This was a party in favor of a strong central government. give you a hint. One of the groups didn't change their name when they made it to a party. Yeah, Federalists again. They just adopted it as a party now instead of just a political faction. Which group was led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and wanted to limit the power of the federal government? So this was the group opposing a strong federal government. Technically not anymore. They changed. They decided not to go with that name for a political party, but they were pretty much the same people. So we need the name of that new political party that opposed the Federalist political party. Yeah, Democratic Republicans. Oh, another one that's kind of difficult to ask, but what was Washington's stance on political parties? How did he feel about political parties? Yeah, he was not a fan. All right. I think this is the last one for this. So there were still arguments before the Constitution was ratified. There were arguments against it to the point that a set of 10 amendments was adopted as a compromise. What is the name, or the common name of these first 10 amendments? Bill of Rights. Very good. Which again, besides just having specific rights written down, also went ahead and made it so that in the future amendments could be made to adjust the Constitution as needed. So the Bill of Rights was more than just like, here's a list of things that we want. It's like also setting the precedent that you can change the Constitution as necessary. Okay. Stuff going on in Europe, which was still very much affecting us. Let's see. Excuse me. What European country had a revolution in 1789 which caused issues with the United States due to old treaties? Yeah, France had their big old revolution. Let's see. Okay, that's a little bit later. What country signed the Treaty of Amherst? Amherst. Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, also known as Jay's Treaty, with the U.S., which removed troops from the Northwest and allowed for trade in the West Indies. What country was that treaty signed with? It was called Amity Commerce and Navigation / Jay's Treaty. Removed troops from the Northwest and allowed for trade in the West Indies. So which European country would that probably involve? Yes. Because, I mean, for me, when we're talking about, like, 1800s Britain, commerce, navigation, the West Indies, and also the Northwest would be, you know, the Canadian border. So that's all British stuff. That is the Treaty of Amity, Commerce, and Navigation, also known as Jay's Treaty. It was signed with the British. Mm-hmm. And because I just like doing multiple choice where I can use the same set of questions or the same set of answers, which country signed the Treaty of San Lorenzo, also known as Pinckney's Treaty, allowed for Americans to use the Mississippi River and the port of New Orleans? Spain, yes. So again, this is another well, technically Spain had Louisiana at this point, and then yada yada, but also the name is Treaty of San Lorenzo. That sounds like Spanish. Mexico isn't independent yet, so it's still the Spanish. All right. Who took over France in the 1800s in a coup? What specific individual overthrew the French Republic and created his own French Empire? Yes. My students last time were having a little trouble with that. I'm like, this is literally like the most famous French person, especially in American history. Like, once I say it, you're gonna hate that you didn't think about it. Well, I thought about Napoleon. Like, yeah, he's French. Well, more or less. Speaking of France, we had American diplomats that met with 3 French agents. However, said agents demanded a bribe and a loan to the French government. What was this event called? They demanded a bribe before they would even talk to our diplomats. Yeah, XYZ affair, because that's just what that was the code name for the 3 French diplomats or officers or whatever. All right. And finally, at least for this little section, Hamilton had a bunch of plans for helping the U.S. financially, funding the public debt, assuming state debts, etc. However, what was the big and controversial proposal that he put forth to make all this possible? What was Hamilton's big thing? That the opposing party was very much against. Yes, exactly. Or a national bank. But same idea. Yeah. Hamilton wanted to make a federal bank. which technically wasn't in the Constitution, so the opposing party was very displeased about it, but it ended up being a pretty big deal. Okay. So, on to some late 1700s presidency. Let's see. After Washington, who won the presidency in 1796? Who was the second president? John Adams. Which was his vice president, so it just kind of made sense. All right. To punish the Democratic Republicans, the Federalists passed several laws. Which law lengthened the amount of time it took to become a citizen? Well, law, act, whatever. Naturalization, yes. Because that's another term for becoming a citizen is naturalization. In case you weren't aware, because otherwise there's not much connection there. Yeah, that's just what that's called. Which law allowed the government to detain enemy aliens in a time of war and for the president to deport any alien he saw as a threat? It's one of those. So which would it be? Well, it's about enemy aliens. So yeah, it's Alien Acts. Technically, there are multiple Alien Acts, so. And which law banned any false or malicious speech against the government or president? Yes, Sedition Act. It's also my other class. The alien, because we just learned Alien Sedition Acts together, and sometimes it's easy to forget. Wait, they're actually two separate. That's what the end is. But then again, we had the law of amity, commerce, and navigation up here, so it's easy to to make a mistake. Okay. Let me see. I think that's it for that. Yeah. So, with all these issues, the election of 1800 was pretty rough. Who won the election for the presidency in 1800? Jefferson. And once he became president, what sector of the country did he focus on? Did he consider most important? When I say sector, I don't necessarily mean like a geographic region, but was that? Well, that was his party, but like what part of the country did he consider most important to focus on? Because remember I was telling you guys, he had a specific focus in mind for America, whereas Hamilton had the opposite. So what was Jefferson's focus? This goes back to what I told you guys about the Northwest Land Ordinance. And also, if you'd like to know anything about Jefferson, as far as like what he did outside of writing everything. Or to ask it another way, what was his vision for America? What did he want America to become? If you guys remember that. wanted a weak central government, but that's not the part that he was, because that's the Democratic Republican thing, period. But there was a certain part of the, I guess you could, I mean, technically it was part of the economy. What part of just like America in general did he put all of his focus on? This was his big thing. This was his dream for the future of America. It's in that direction, but do you remember why I said he wanted there to be that many states in that region of the country? Like what group would this help? And like really overall group, not a party. Like what? Yes, he's all about agriculture. Jefferson was the agriculture guy. He wanted America to be this agrarian society. I mean, which I think he. I mean, obviously, all the technology we have today, he wouldn't. He feel like he was in an alien on an alien planet. But considering like the percentage of the country that is farming, even if it's just a bunch of super rich farmers that own all that land, we're still fairly agrarian. All right. I think that's it for that page. Okay. On to the next chapter. So, we were talking about like the new American culture and all of that. Who put together the American Spelling Book in the early 1800s to standardize spelling and pronunciation of words in the U.S.? Specifically to differentiate them from the British, because we have to be different. Bless you. Yeah, this was Webster. Because again, he did the dictionary not long after, and that was a big deal. Let's see. Do I have? Okay. Oh no, that's way down here. All right, cool. All right. Who was put in charge of internal improvements under Jefferson's administration? Main advisor in matter of internal improvements, which again is roads, canals, all that stuff. Which you guys see was really important. He was also Jefferson's Secretary of Treasury. Like for me, his big thing is getting these roads and canals built. The let's see, where are we at? Who's the president's main advisor in matters of internal improvements? Which is to say, roads and canals. He was a real important guy in Jefferson's administration. Or at least the chapter in that American technology class I used to teach taught more about him than it did Jefferson. It's probably not somebody you know from regular high school history. Yeah, Gallatin. The Gallatin, again, real important for getting a lot of our early roads and stuff built. All right, this one, I assume everybody's going to know. What agreement with France sold their land in North America to the United States in 1803? What's the agreement where France sold all their land in North America to the U.S.? Yeah. Let's see if where this is exactly. Okay, no, it's oh no, it's before that. Okay, cool. I'm gonna pop this back up here real quick. I didn't have a specific place for that. What was the original name for the national capital built along the Potomac River? This was when the new capital was being built. Washington City. Good. Yeah, it was the new capital on the Potomac. Again, it's modern day DC, but it wasn't DC yet. So we have the various explorations. Lewis and Clark is the famous one, but everyone knows that one. So instead, who explored across the Mexican border ended up captured, only to be escorted back to America with valuable knowledge of Terror Train and Mexican politics. So who was the explorer that ended up getting captured by Mexican forces? Yeah, Zebulon Pike. All right, and a couple of technology things here before we move to the next chapter. Who constructed the first successful steamboat, which later caused shipping prices along rivers to plummet? So who got the first successful steamboat put together? Like I said, there were lots of other ones, but they didn't quite work. operator of the first successful steamboat? Fulton, very good. Robert Fulton. Yeah, because the early steamboats were called Fulton steamboats. Or at least the design. Alright, this one, I assume y'all will get as well. What is Eli Whitney famous for developing? Cotton gin. Alright, let's dive into chapter 9. Okay. So, War of 1812. What was the main cause for the war in terms of infringing on American neutrality? So obviously there were a bunch of various reasons, but this was I said this was like the final straw when it came to going to war. That's something America had been dealing with the British since before we were even independent. Something I brought up a lot in the last several chapters. Yes, do you remember what that word is? You are correct. Forced drafting into the Navy. What is that called? Not oppression. Impressment. Or is that? Okay. I mean, you were close. Yeah, impressment. Which again, like, in a country where you're part of that country, I mean, it's the draft basically, but specifically for the Navy. But like when we're a separate sovereign nation, it's can't do that really. Okay. Let's see. What Native American warrior, having fled to Canada, reached the rank of Brigadier General in the British Army during the war? So this was a Native American that had been run out of the U.S. after various conflicts, and then ended up working with the British to the point that he was the same rank that Washington was in the Revolutionary War. Yes, Tecumseh. What important American city was partially and strategically burned to the ground by the British in the War of 1812? Washington City. Which again is why it ends up getting rebuilt and slightly renamed. What peace agreement was signed to end the war? Yes, Treaty of Ghent. which I checked last time. It is in Belgium. No, Brussels. That said, this technically occurred after the treaty was signed. What general defended New Orleans from a massive British attack in January of 1815? It was the general that fought off the British. Technically, the war was over, but it had only been like a couple of weeks, and yeah, Andrew Jackson. Like I said, there's a lot I'm not gonna defend Jackson on, but he there was no way he did it all. All right. What was the federal act that claimed the Western Hemisphere was under America's sphere of influence, thus forbidding European involvement? The Monroe Doctrine. Good. Which is going to factor heavily into next semester as well. Who orchestrated the Missouri Compromise? Who's the main guy behind the compromise? Henry Clay. Good. Now again, this one, I normally I'd have had a video, but we were running out of time. What was the canal that linked Western farmers to the Hudson River, which made New York City the premier seaport in the nation? Yes, the Erie Canal. So I cannot express the importance of the Erie Canal when it came to the shift in really the entire American economy. So it was a pretty big deal. All right, a couple more things to finish this chapter. Who was the free black man in Charleston, South Carolina, who was hanged for supposedly plotting to free the city slaves? And honestly, it's a shame that he didn't do that, because he really looked like he had the look of a revolutionary type. Yes, Denmark Vesey. All right, Andrew Jackson. A couple things on him, and then there's like 4 questions from chapter 10, but we did go over that briefly last week. After winning the election in 1828, what informal group of advisors did Andrew Jackson often rely on? What was this group of advisors known as? This informal group of advisors, I should clarify. This was after the Petticoat Affair and all of that, and had to have his regular advisors resign and get a whole new set. It's kind of a goofy name, I'll be honest. formal group of advisors to the president is called? This is a play on that. That's what he called his party. This was his. These were his advisors after the whole petticoat affair thing. Yes, because the formal group is the cabinet, and this was just some dudes he would meet with that were like his buddies that he actually listened to. They were called his kitchen cabinet. Because, again, politicians like jokes, I guess. What was the term for a state refusing to accept a federal law? Which it was South Carolina, because of course it was. What was the term for a state refusing to accept a federal law? Nullification. Yeah, it led to the whole, nullification crisis thing. Yeah, nullification is a state just being like, we don't feel like following this law. It's like, you can't do that. Finally, for this chapter, what was the name of the Cherokee president who used the legal system to try and fight for his people's land? The Cherokee tribe created a republican form of government to try to legally fight the U.S. to keep their land. And this chief became president. I guess he was a chief originally. John Ross. All right, and now for just the 4 in chapter 10 that I very quickly went over last week. What was the main economic product of the United States in the early 1800s? What was the big thing we're making all our money on? Cotton. Yeah. Sounds. That should be the easy one for that chapter. What was the name of the? Well, I guess I should say what is, because it's still around. What's the name of the dialect that combined African words and speech patterns with English? Apparently still yes. I can say it still exists, like on the Sea Islands. All right. A large slave revolt. Who led said slave revolt in 1831 in Virginia? killed 57 white men, women, and children, freed 50 slaves before they were crushed by the state militia. Nat Turner. Yeah, because this was just called Nat Turner's Rebellion, so it was easier just to have the name of the guy. So, one last thing. What was the battle in which Texan rebels were killed at a fort by Mexican forces? This is like the big thing in Texas. Alamo. I know what you were trying. Alamo. Yes. Because, I mean, I figure we might as well end with the Alamo, right? And then, of course, there's going to be extra credit for a lot of the short answer. If you know more than just what I asked, that's extra credit. And then the back is just a whole, I think that's like 10 points of extra credit on the back. 11. Yeah. So, that's all I got. Any questions from you guys? Anything I need to go back over real quick? We do still have like 15 minutes, surprisingly. Yes. Yes. So, for you guys, so not for you online folks, obviously, it's Wednesday at 8:30 in here. It's technically 8:30 to 10:30, so you have extra time if you need it, but it's not going to be any bigger than any other test. I mean, technically we do have, again, literally 4 questions from another chapter, but it's still 50 questions total. Yeah, you just come in and you take it and you leave. Now, technically, I will be here both Wednesday and Friday, so if for some reason your schedule doesn't work out for Wednesday, you can come in Friday. There will probably be people from my other class in here on Wednesday as well, just to go ahead and get their stuff done. But I'm also here Friday, so Wednesday and Friday, 8:30, 10:30, pick one of those. For you online folks, I will put the test up on Blackboard probably tomorrow, and you have a week to get it done. And then when it's the week's up, that's it, because I got to have all my grades in by next Tuesday. So, yeah. Yes. Yep. I mean, technically this is the last class. The next one's just exam time, but yeah. We're the only class that, at least for me, where we have it at a normal time. It's like for my 10 o'clock class, they have to come in at 8:30. So, but yeah, for you guys, we'll be done Wednesday. So I'll see y'all then.